Back, absolutely free. That's BRAVE 242424. A fourth inspector general fired by Trump, this time for investigating the Secretary of State. Now Congress is investigating whether this was an act of retaliation. A new $3 trillion economic relief bill passes the House, including another relief check for all taxpayers. But chances are you won't see one. And more than 14,000 workers in one single industry may have coronavirus. Trump says they're essential, but he may have just made America's most dangerous job even more dangerous. Velshi starts now. Good morning. It is Sunday, May 17th. I'm Ali Velshi. We begin with former President Barack Obama for the second time in a little more than a week, calling out the administration officials for a lack of leadership during the coronavirus outbreak.
More than anything, this pandemic has finally torn back the curtain on the idea that so many of the folks in charge know what they're doing. A lot of them aren't even pretending to be in charge. If the world's going to get better, it's going to be up to you.
His comments are part of a national ceremony honoring high school graduates from the class of 2020. We're going to have much more on that story in just a bit. But first, we've got new details about yet another federal watchdog fired amid the pandemic by the Trump administration. Top Democrats, including House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Eliot Engel and Senator Bob Menendez, are launching an investigation. It comes after Friday's late-night ouster of State Department Inspector General Steve Linick. This man, according to a White House official, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo recommended the move, and Trump agreed. Engel releasing a statement calling Linick's removal an outrageous act. Here's the thing. Engel claims the Inspector General was fired because he launched a probe into Secretary Mike Pompeo. State Department sources confirm the position is going to be filled by Ambassador Stephen Accard, an ally of Vice President Mike Pence. As for the reason why Linick was removed from his post, he, quote, no longer has the fullest confidence of the president. In other words, he was no longer suited for the role because he didn't fall in line with the administration's expectations. He wasn't a Trump loyalist. Linick is the fourth independent watchdog that has been let go by Trump in the last 6 weeks. Most were Obama administration appointees, except for Michael Atkinson, the Intelligence Community Inspector General. All this happening as the country reopens, and folks everywhere are excited, even downright jubilant about getting back outside again. Let's listen.
I'm pretty excited to get out of the house after 2 months. For the first time in 12 years, I haven't had a grandkid go to baseball games because they canceled them all.
We are very excited to be up here today. It's a gorgeous day.
It's nice. It's very nice.
All right, I share their excitement, but a note of caution. Remember, remain vigilant. We are very much still in the thick of this pandemic. Here are the facts. As most parts of the country continue the process of reopening, the confirmed number of COVID-19 cases in the United States has increased to more than 1,476,000. The number of fatalities stands at 89,647. Joining me now, Jennifer Rubin, MSNBC contributor and opinion writer with The Washington Post, and Dean Obeidallah, host of Sirius XM's The Dean Obeidallah Show, and a columnist with The Daily Beast. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for joining us. Jennifer Rubin, inspectors general, they are not people we know much about. We don't think about most Americans. I think 12 out of 10 couldn't name an inspector general unless they've been fired by Trump. But they are there to make sure the swamp stays less swampy, if you will. They're the internal people who keep the government honest. What's going on with the continued firing of these people by Donald Trump?
I think this is the result of, frankly, the impeachment that's now a few months in the rearview mirror. This president feels unbowed. He is unconstrained. And anyone who's going to report wrongdoing in this administration, whether it's Mike Pompeo, whether it's anyone else within the HHS, for example, that has mishandled the coronavirus, that whistleblower is now, I think, in career jeopardy by this administration. And you're right, Allie, this is the very person, the very people who are there within the executive branch who are considered to be somewhat independent, who have a longer term vision. Many of them are career people who have been in, if not that post, other posts in the past, and they're there to prevent corruption. They're there to prevent wrongdoing. And frankly, the next one that I'm very nervous about is Mr. Horowitz, who is over in the Justice Department. He clearly may be next because he has not exactly towed the line.
Steve Linick, Dean, has no recourse, really, because these people serve at the pleasure of the president. All that has to happen is the president has to report to Congress that he's firing him, which he did, and his reasoning was that he's lost the confidence of the president. But the bottom line here is that when you do stuff like this, you stir up a hornet's nest. If it's true, and if it is true, we'll find out. If he was investigating the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, for any form of wrongdoing, that will obviously come out.
We hope so, and I think this is part of Donald Trump's make the dictatorships great again, because Donald Trump doesn't like the rule of law. I'm not breaking news here. He doesn't like checks and balances. He doesn't like democratic norms. If I want you to take a step back, the Inspector General Act was passed in 1978 after Watergate, after a runaway lawless president, in an effort to contain that by having a quasi-independent IGs who would look at fraud and corruption, things that Trump does not want anyone to stop. In the case of Mike Pompeo, as opposed to an Obamagate, which is a work in progress by Trump to distract America from 90,000 Americans dead and the worst economy since the Depression, Pompeo-gate, if people call it on Twitter, is pretty clear, straightforward, if it's true. Mike Pompeo and his wife, Susan Pompeo, were using our tax dollars to run personal errands, to get their dog from the groomer, to pick up their son at the train station, go get food for them. And Mike Pompeo's wife, Susan, has got her own personal security detail. They're investigating why. She does not work for the government. So they get rid of Stephen Linick. Just look at the guy's background. Before this, he served for 10 years as a federal prosecutor. He's also in the DOJ after that, studying, working on fraud cases. To Trump, this is like Robert Mueller all over again. So Trump gets rid of him, and sadly, the Inspector General Act allows that. I don't know why Congress in 78 gave the power to the president, who they're trying to rein in his powers to do that. So that's another thing we've learned about during this whole Trump presidency, I'll use the air quotes, that we have to address this when Donald Trump is gone and there's Democratic members of Congress to make it harder to get rid of the referees, and that's what Trump is doing.
Well, you two are both lawyers and I'm not, but I would assume that Linick is employed by the executive branch, and that's probably why the president has that right, but maybe that should be changed. I mean, in lots of industries, Jennifer, this kind of human exists, right? In some newspapers, we have an ombudsman. On Wall Street, there are compliance officers. In the police, there are internal affairs. There are people who are there to say, is the department running properly? Is everybody in the department complying with the law? I mean, Donald Trump did run on this basis of draining the swamp. This has got to be dangerous for him in an election when you point out. We can just keep on putting it up on screen. In fact, I'm going to ask my producers to put it up again. 4 inspector generals in the last 2 months have been fired for Donald Trump, none of whom were fired for what most humans would think of as cause.
You know, it's very interesting. All of the individuals you just named, Ali, are people who would normally report either to the chairman of the board of their organization or to the CEO. There's a problem when your chairman of the board or your CEO himself is the problem, is the source of the corruption. And so you're exactly right. As an executive branch employee, he ultimately has to be able to be fired by the president. That's the way our constitutional system works. But this is where we see how everything has kind of broken down. If the president is the person who is fundamentally dishonest, who is the person who is flaunting the law, who is engaged in the corruption and is willing to allow and encourage the corruption of his subordinates, then there really is no check. Really, it's Congress here, and Congress has to have the nerve to have hearings and has to have the nerve to be able to subpoena witnesses. We have a whistleblower who has just stepped forward, who testified before Congress to the facts and the mishandling of our pandemic. And they need to do the same here to get the facts out so people know what wrongdoing is going on and that there can at least be political accountability at the ballot box in November.
And there is no political accountability. That's the whole concept. You know, we want to look and point our finger at Congress. Well, it was Congress that gave Donald Trump a green light in what he done to the Ukrainians. Let's not forget that he was found guilty of doing what he done to the Ukrainians. It just wasn't an impeachable offense. It was Congress that basically said, oh yeah, you done wrong, but it wasn't to the point of an impeachable offense. Whenever you have all these checks and balances that are no longer considered checks and balances, then you have a free-for-all. You have just exactly what Obama just said, that once you pull off the mask or pull away the curtain, now we realize with all transparency that this thing is a runaway train. It is a free-for-all, and what frightens me is what is it going to be like once we finally get to the bottom. I've used this analogy before and I'll use it again. Whenever it comes to trusted voices, there's too much disinformation pertaining to manipulation of people using tactics for their own gains. Algorithms or trying to make things more complicating is only for the benefit of those who can benefit from these things. People are taking unnecessary chances or unnecessary risks. People like your anti-vaccination people. People like your white supremacist people. People like your climate change deniers. Or your pandemic deniers. Spreading dangerous misinformation based around fake news. The risk of doing this does not outweigh the reward. Because ultimately, whenever you're talking about the deaths of millions of people pertaining to the pandemic of worldwide stuff that's going on, it is not nothing to fool around with. Even last night, whenever I went to Walmart up here in Union City, the Walmart attendants that was working there, all of them had masks on. But I got to noticing 99.9% of everybody that was walking in and coming out pertaining to the customer base was not wearing a mask. A matter of fact, somebody criticized me, one of the tenants that worked at Walmart, because I had my mask on upside down. And I didn't realize it at the time. It has reached a boiling point in Donald Trump's administration that the blind is leading the blind, just as the Bible talks about. And whenever a society is generated or formigated in this type of way, to the point that that's all we know is stuff that we don't know, we become a society that anything is apt to happen from A to Z. Regardless whether it be the pandemic, or people going broke, people having to declare bankruptcy, people having to misdiagnose people's sicknesses, people taking things out of concept whenever it comes to people having to redo scheduling. You know, whenever you upset the apple cart, the way that the apple cart has been upset, there's really not a playbook or an owner's manual towards telling us how that we should conform and get back to the right way. It's obvious that the way that we was on was the wrong way because God allowed for this to happen. There's only going to be one right way, and that is to go back, just as the first 4 chapters of Revelations talks about, and do thy works over again, and to get it right in the spirit world. That is going to be the only way, and the only sure-footing, certain way that we as society can go back into the realm of normalcy, so that we will not jeopardize not only our own personal health, but those around us. We have to be aware that we as a society is not greater than the Almighty. And whenever it comes to allowing for these things to fall upon the society, God has allowed for this to happen for a reason. He's trying to purge us. He's trying to tweak us. He's trying to fine-tune us, because he has not yet found our works perfect yet. It's very obvious what is going on according to the first 4 chapters of Revelations. Of course, you got those out there that want to preach that God is dead, or that this is going on, or that that's going on. Well, these are the people that basically are either gaining from this type of drama in some sort of way, or these are the people that are the Antichrist theorist that's out there doing what they're doing towards trying to make God's holy people's lives that much more miserable. So please, please, in the eyes of my viewers, take things with a grain of salt, remain vigilant pertaining to your health issues, and always, always keep God first in your life, regardless whether you go to church directly or indirectly. Whether or not you just read the Bible and do your church thing at home, please always remember the Almighty, that it is within His powers that He is allowing for these occurrences to happen. It's all the other stuff of the devil's workers that are bringing that much more anxiety, that are bringing that much more confusion into people's hearts and into people's minds, which once more verifies what the Bible teaches, that Satan is in fact the author of confusion. And when you have this much confusion, you have to go to the point of origin. Who has created this confusion? How come we do not have good, sound, trustworthy voices out there to where people can listen to and realize this is in fact the right path? This is in fact the right way. This is in fact the right information. How come we do not have that out there in society right now? Simply because the devil is wreaking havoc upon to humanity. And yes, in a sense, we are under spiritual siege. Just the other day, I explained to my son, I said, son, because he has known the passion and the
But
concept
between the two of you
pertaining to
and others who
pertaining to the Windmill Ministries now for quite some times. I explained to him about that in which what he had brought up in regards to me playing a safeguard card just in case I was to get the pandemic and die from it. I think any reasonable parent or any reasonable person that knows that everything is in the hands of God has that certain percentage of understanding that even though you may be one of God's right-hand men, there's still always that possibility, especially whenever you're already fighting these demons the way that I've been fighting them now for 30-something years, that I may get checked out before my time, before I feel like that my purpose has been fulfilled. And I explained that to my son, and he said, well, if you die, one of the first things I'm going to do is go down there and remove that engraving off of my grandfather's headstone that reads lithium on the back bottom side. It was an argument pertaining to Mr. James Robert Jackson back in 1983 that I needed to be put on some sort of heavily seduces narcotic medication. And the whole time it was him that needed to be on this type of medication because he could not control his anger management issues based around post-traumatic stress disorder of what that he had achieved during World War II towards being a drill sergeant. Plus, he had turned his back on God and he was living a life of the devil and for the devil. And he was trying to destroy his son. He was trying to destroy his son's purpose. And my father knew that if he could brand me hard enough, strong enough, towards being a person that was basically a nut job, a whack job, somebody that needed some kind of a psychiatric help, that if he could brand me by doing that, that it would basically kill any type of involvement towards me being the spokesman or the messenger or a minister of a ministry. That was the whole concept of what went on in my life in 1983. My son, Nicholas Jackson, took that at heart. That seed that was planted in his heart, he took that at heart. Especially whenever him and I wound up going on our first crusade up to Washington, D.C. and New York, and I realized ever since that I took him on that journey, he has basically denounced any type of good time that he had, and he despised the fact that I engaged him into something that he did not volunteer for. At the time, he was only about 10, 11, 12 years old, and I felt like that it would be a good journey or a good path to go on towards passing out literature in honor of the Lord Jesus Christ. Today, my son and I still has this wall, this barrier that has been built, not because of me, but because of him. Him and his wife and his in-laws and his brother-in-laws have taken the same stance against me the same way that my father did. And it wasn't until the death of my father, 2 weeks after, that his spirit come to me in such of a remorseful, undeniable way. Dennis, I'm sorry. Dennis, I'm sorry. Forgive me. Forgive me. Forgive me. It wasn't until then that I realized that my father had been tricked and deceived by Satan himself. This same deception is still ruling at thumb. Not only in my son's life, not only in my ex-wife's life, not only in various other in-laws of my own, but by and large throughout the neighborhood. I cannot repeat it enough. This ministry that God gave me to give to society, this ministry did not fail the people, but the people failed the ministry. And as I told my son, it will come in different degrees pertaining to the two witnesses that is to come forth. And if something happens to me physically, that will not stop me spiritually towards being there on that day whenever not only I see the doomsday devil's duel that will be performed physically here upon to the earth, but it will not stop the performance towards me seeing it in actual life on a spiritual level, towards seeing the doomsday devil's duel and actually being a part of it. Now, my son does not know that. And there's people like my son that don't know that because they cannot separate the two. They do not know the difference between rightfully dividing the scriptures, that sometimes Christ was talking about the physical form, sometimes Christ was talking about the spiritual form, and sometimes Christ was possibly talking about both at the same time. This Trojan horse that has been given to society has been used just as you would use an old horse, a plank, as you would use an old tool, to the point that now it's coming back and biting society. Because if you'll understand history, you'll be able to look back even during Genghis Khan's day. There was men and women that knew that they should give homage to certain people because of their characteristics. Tommy Moore, the judge here in Weakley County, has brought reference to me before by saying, well, Dennis, it says in the Bible that a true prophet is without honor among his own people and in his own home. Okay, it does say that, Mr. Tommy Moore, but that doesn't mean that it should give people like Tommy Moore and other people the privilege of being able to attack me and destroy me. That's the difference that I'm talking about here that has occurred with the founder of the Windmill Ministries. It's one thing to deny the message, but it's another thing to attack the messenger. And that's exactly what has been going on for the past 30 years. And if they think that they're not going to pay for this one way or the other, if they think that they're getting by and they can steal and conjure up this ideal that has occurred in my personal life towards distributing out freely and openly and fairly to the population, if they think that they're going to get away by doing this as some sort of a thief, they're only fooling themselves, because I guarantee you there will be a cost, and it will be a severe one. A severe
Will, to the
one.
best of my ability,
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend
preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution of the United States.
the Constitution of the United States.
Donald Trump.
Now, how come wasn't that explained in Mr. Bush's administration, not only the 43rd president of the United States, but
The rule of law.
but the
Now, think back to this one. In 2000,
the 41st president of the United States, how come that wasn't expressed to them very thoroughly that you cannot apprehend a tool from a ministry under the freedom of speech and freedom the right to bear arms and the freedom of religion Constitution. How come that wasn't expressed to them whenever they confiscated the first sword from the ministry? That's just it. This resistance movement that I'm still under, that I'm still in, after 30-something years, is still going on. And it's not just going on by my son, Nicholas Jackson, but it's going on by and large throughout the church communities and the community itself, because they talk out of both sides of their mouth. White man speaketh with forked tongue. They talk about peace. They talk about loyalty. They talk about dignity. They talk about duty. These are all words that sound good, but in reality, they're far from it. Because if they did mean what they said that they meant, there would be a congregation out here that would be supporting the Windmill Ministries. And I do not see that support. All I see is a resistance movement. And as things is untangling and getting worse pertaining to our divorces, pertaining to the bankruptcies, pertaining to 2.3 incarcerated prisoners in jail, pertaining to this corruption going on throughout the churches and throughout our political stance, us being, 26 trillion dollars in debt. What I'm seeing is a calamity of destruction that is upon the American people. And until they're willing to go back and do thy first works over again, it's only going to grow and intensify. Period. It's only going to grow and intensify. That's the bottom line. That's the bottom line towards the fake news and listening to people that you cannot trust.
View the law in other cases, and that's really what bothers me the most. The Justice Department in similar cases has consistently taken the view that the bar is very low when it comes to, for example, materiality, which is the issue that it's raising in the Michael Flynn case. And they're literally arguing the opposite position that they usually argue, taking the opposite view on the law than they usually do for Michael Flynn. And it makes you wonder, what is so special about Michael Flynn other than the fact that he's one of the president's friends, that he has potentially information about the president?
Barbara, there's something that we didn't really understand, we non-lawyers don't understand, and that is that Michael Flynn pled guilty. This case was before the courts, and then the Department of Justice decided to change course on this whole thing. There's both a legal argument problem with it, and there's a legal standing problem with it, in that right now this is a matter for the judge, and the judge in the case has taken exception to this, having hired another former judge to argue against the government.
That's right. Under the separation of powers concepts in our Constitution, it is the prosecutor who has the discretion to decide when to bring a case, and they get a lot of deference to that authority. But once the court becomes involved through a guilty plea that has been accepted, as it has in this case, then the ball really is in the judge's court. Even a motion to dismiss requires what's known as leave of court, permission of the court. And so the judge here, Judge Sullivan, has said, I'm not just going to take your word for it, Department of Justice, that this is in the best interest of justice. Michael Flynn stood in open court and told me he's guilty. And to now see some sort of convoluted, twisted legal argument to suggest that there is some technical reason this case must be dismissed, I'm not satisfied. And now that Michael Flynn says, in fact, he's not guilty, that means that he told me the truth on one occasion and he told me a lie on another. So he has appointed a former judge, a former federal prosecutor, to come in and help argue the other side of the case here to make some sense of it. One of the things that Judge Gleason, who's been appointed to help Judge Sullivan in this case, has said is the court should not be a party to corruption. And I think that is what Judge Sullivan...
If I did not plead guilty to a crime that I shouldn't have pleaded guilty to pertaining to stalking, because David and I was concerned about the welfare and the benefit.
Judge Emmett Sullivan is in a weird position now.
Of children across the road. If I did not do what I done towards getting out of jail, I am thoroughly convinced that just about everything on this piece of property would have either been stolen or destroyed, including the very trailer, the RV trailer that I'm sitting in right now. I had allowed for a group of people to come into this home or come into my presence that was nothing but a bunch of meth makers that I had no earthly idea towards the extent of how deformed that decision that I made was, simply because I was grieving and I was under the assumption from my son that this particular person was so-so and was okay. While talking on the telephone, trying to work out some sort of agreement of getting out on bond, my son let me down because he said that he still owed $1,000 and something on a note down in Memphis, and because the note was not free, he could not sign off on my bond towards allowing for me to get out of jail. He was the very individual that told me about this individual, that as far as he was concerned, this individual was okay. Because I had too many things going on in my life at that time. I was vulnerable. I was very vulnerable because I was grieving and I was dismayed at how the law enforcement in this county was treating us, David and I. Just absolutely in shock about what was going on, knowing that we was being attacked. It was a siege that was happening right here on our own property. If I did not plead guilty towards getting out of jail whenever I did, I would have come back to total chaos, and there wouldn't have even been so much as a screwdriver or even a trailer left here for me to come back to. I was caught in between a hard place and a rock, and I felt like that I had to plead guilty to a crime that I never should have pleaded guilty to. But all in all, if I had it to do over again pertaining to 3 innocent children that was subject to a drug-induced environment, to the point of me seeing what was going on in these children's life, I would have done it all over again. I would have done it all over again for the children's sake. I'm going to end this right here to my viewers because of the total idiotic insanity that I've had to deal with. That once more, the risks of people going out without mask and without using social distancing matters does not outweigh the rewards. And if people think that they can undermine, overpower, manipulate, or in algorithms towards making things that much more complicated to the point that God isn't going to know what's going on and seek retribution upon the society. If people think that they can outwit God in these matters, they're only deceiving themselves. Good luck to all of us, and once more, shalom.